counterintuitive.
Oh,
Oh, and we're live. Hello, everyone. I'm Jenna Paone. Welcome to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm so thrilled to have Denny Bryce here today with me to talk about her fabulous new book, Wild Women and the Blues. Welcome, Denny, and congratulations.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and live.
Yes, I know. And you're a member of our Mighty Blaze team too. So this is like an extra special thing for us. And I have to say, I feel like you win the cover award of like this century. I do judge a book by its cover. And I totally, when I saw your book, I was like, whoever wrote this book, I need to speak to this person and I must read this book. Like that cover.
Well, you see that I have covers most definitely as my backdrop for all of my on-air events or virtual events as they're actually called. But I am not the designer of these fabulous, fabulous things. The designer, I always want to give credit where credit is due. Kensington's cover designer is Christina Mills, and the cover illustrator, Sarah Knott. So I'm definitely in very much thanking them for their creativity, and they're getting the message of the story because
they nailed it.
To me, this cover, and maybe it's just me, going into some sort of trance state, but I see Anna Ray so vividly in this cover. The positioning of her body, just the way her head is tilted, and there's something about the angle of her spine that's very dancery. And also, something's on this woman's mind, and I like that. I like how much is conveyed. I'm also a sort of a cover nerd.
Me too.
I mean, I just do this thing with covers, and I have friends who actually will send me well, they will send me, and because I will give them my opinion, their covers, and I'll say, well, this is fantastic, or this is something that has me, questioning here and there. But
I love it. You clearly inspired me to dress up today. I had to get out one of my own like old performance costume top things to like wear because I was like, I have to go with the green. I have to match Honore. And the peacock feathers. I love it. Well, we're going to get into all that. First, I just want to backtrack a little bit, introduce you, introduce the book, sing your praises a bit, and then we'll get into the questions and talk about this beautiful, beautiful book that is such a treat. It's such a joy to read, and I can't thank you enough for writing it because I had so much fun losing myself in the world of this story. So about you first. Denny Bryce writes historical fiction, and her debut novel, Wild Women and the Blues from Kensington Books, is available wherever books are sold. A public relations professional, she spent more than 20 years running her marketing and public relations firm. For nearly 10 of those years, she wrote and read Buffy and Spike fan fiction, which I love. I'm so into that. We have to talk about that. Before fan fiction and her days as a PR diva, this graduate of Barrett College at DePaul University was a professional dancer, part-time singer, and bad actress, which I don't believe.
Yes.
She worked with professional dance companies in Chicago and New York, and a theatrical production which almost debuted off Broadway, which I have many of those in my past. And anyone who has ever done the creative world knows that that's an accomplishment. So I celebrate you for that.
So close.
So close. I know. We all have those stories, right? I was almost in this role, or like I was. That's what makes our lives fun, the almost. In college, Denny minored in history, but her love of 20th century American history, 19th century British history, and Africa, she credits to her maternal grandmother, Ella Elizabeth Joseph. An RWA Golden Heart winner, Denny now writes book reviews for NPR Books, recaps Outlander on Stars, and authors other entertainment articles and essays for Frolic Media and other online media and magazines. Denny recently relocated from Northern Virginia to Savannah, Georgia, but enjoys traveling the USA, Europe, and the Caribbean.
And it may come back soon, that bug. So
yes, right now that we can maybe start living our lives again as normal, that travel bug is going to be, is I think all of us are really.
Yeah. Let's get some trips going. Let's do this.
Of Wild Women and the Blues, Oprah magazine says the music practically pours out of the pages of Denny S. Bryce's historical novel set among the artists and dreamers of the 1920s. Ms. magazine calls it immersive, mysterious, and evocative, factual in its history and nuanced in its creativity. And Nancy Johnson, author of The Kindest Lies, says, with shining prose and a flair for authentic detail, Bryce brings us into a love story that blooms in the world of racketeering, chorus girls, and bootleg whiskey. Wild Women in the Blues is a Goodreads debut novel to discover and biggest upcoming historical fiction books. It's one of Oprah Magazine, Parade, Ms. Magazine, She Reads, Bustle, Book Club, Frolic, and Biblio Lifestyle's most anticipated books. It has more everything from Today, BuzzFeed, Marie Claire, Black Business Guides, She Reads, Palm Beach Post, one of the most anticipated books of the spring and summer. Like,
no, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sort of get to a point where you're like, oh, this is exciting now. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Right? Be excited. You should be excited. I mean, like, you killed it. Debut novel, and you're killing it. Congratulations.
Very exciting, very gratifying, because that book, my lovely Wild Women in the Blues, took 6 years to write. And part of that, of course, had to do with me learning the craft, but also, I was working, still working full time in my marketing event management capacity. And had to shift some of my lifestyle around in order to be able, for a person like me, my attention span is not the best.
Mine either.
Say that and admit it. No, admit it. Not the best. I really needed to reorganize my priorities so that I could do this thing that I've been dreaming of doing for years and years, and that's writing.
Well, you did it. And I also want to encourage everyone who's watching to feel free to ask Denny some questions, and we'll try to get to them at the end. We're going to start off. I love, personally, I love the stories that are like, this book took me 6 years to write, because like I'm on year 3 of working on my debut novel, and like and you know what? It's especially in like historical fiction, the research and everything, you have to put so much legwork into everything. It's not just that you have to write a novel, it's that you have to write a historically accurate and well-researched novel, and you have to like adopt a whole new vernacular of speaking, because you have to integrate the slang of the day, and you have to do all of these things and kind of stay true to the reality of the historical time period while also making it accessible to contemporary audiences. There's so many things you're juggling, and you do it so well. And you also have this dual timeline book, and we're going to talk about all of this. But first off, for those of us who haven't read it yet, can you just tell us a little bit about Wild Women in the Blues? Give us your elevator pitch, or
elevator pitch. Well, it's a dual storyline, and it tells the story of Honorée Dalcour in 1925. She's a 19-year-old chorus girl, and her ambition is to make it to the bigger nightclubs and have a bigger career in the business, because she's already pretty independent, but the opportunity to really showcase her talents and skills is something she wants to do in a better nightclub environment than the speakeasy she works at the beginning of the story. And then in 2015, a grieving film student, Sawyer Hayes, is wanting to get something back and under control in his life, because he feels like he's been, he definitely has been a bit out of it for a while, since a tragedy in his family. So in his grandmother's attic, he finds a box, and in that box are some things that intrigue him, because he was working on a study. He was working on his dissertation, if you will, on Oscar Micheaux, the legendary Black filmmaker. And he finds photos in this box in his grandmother's house of a woman named Honorée Dalcour. She's in some photos, she's with Louis Armstrong. In some photos, she's with Oscar Micheaux. And he finds a phone number on the back. Not only her name, but a phone number, and not a phone number from 1925.
Yeah.
I mean, those numbers went like,
Can you imagine? I wouldn't even know what a phone number from 1925 was, right?
it's very, very different. So he dials the number, ends up reaching a senior living facility, and there's a woman alive named Honoré Dalcourt. So he heads off to Chicago's Bronzeville to interview her. Now, those two stories come together. I feel, or my goal was to have them come together in a surprising way.
Which they do.
As they both reveal more and more about who these people are, the complexities of their lives, the obstacles that keep them from becoming their true selves, and all of that sort of stuff. So that's my short version of what Wild Women in the Blues is all about.
Yes, I think you did a great job and of course, as always, we're not going to give any spoilers. We want you to, enjoy the book as you read it. But it's so great. And I understand that this was inspired by some personal connections and experiences that you have. Can you talk a little bit about where you got the idea for this in the first place? What the kernel of the idea was for this book?
I like to say that I had layers of inspiration. My interest in history and the 1920s definitely stemmed from my maternal grandmother. Her name, Ella Elizabeth. She came to this country from Montego Bay, Jamaica in 1923. Arrived in New York City to meet a beau, and as one does, and he wasn't where he was supposed to be, so she ended up in a small town in Ohio. But in that small town, when I was growing up, when I was a little girl, I would be really interested in all of these photos she had on the wall of herself in these fabulous clothes, or from what I could tell, she was dressed up. She always looked like she was going to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
It was, in this great old cars, and I just asked her questions. I was like, what was going on there? Where were you? What was this about? You were younger,
You were younger. What's up with that?
You were young one day?
Oh, it's great.
And she was generously share these stories about her life in the 1920s and beyond. And then the other inspiration, which was really actually my connection to one of the characters in the story. You mentioned that I was a professional dancer, and when I danced professionally in New York City, as one does, I waited on tables.
Of course.
And, of course, you wish the money would just roll in, but no, you wait on tables. Yeah. And so one of the places I worked at was a place called The Cookery in the East Village. The owner of the cookery was a gentleman by the name of Barney Josephson. And Barney's claim to fame was that he was the owner of Cafe Society, which was where Billie Holiday first sang Strange Fruit. Barney, at the time I knew him, was probably, I thought he was 100 years old, but I didn't know. He was what he was, but he was definitely the owner. And he invited a lot of people from his old world, I guess. So one of the entertainers, one of the more popular entertainers, was a woman by the name of Alberta Hunter, who was going back to her career in her 80s.
Which is amazing. I mean, like,
it was amazing. I just, I loved the way
incredible blues singer, for those of you who
it was,
not know.
I did not know. Now, let me be honest. I was not aware of her history or anything like that. Excuse me, at the time. And really didn't connect back to the fact that I knew her until, a long time later. And but my job, and the reason I got to know her, and she was so memorable to me, was that my job was to bring her tea. And so during those times before her performance, as she was preparing, I'd bring her tea and we'd chat. And we bonded over our mutual connection to Chicago, because she was a Chicago gal and I was a Chicago gal.
Mm.
And so that was pretty much, I've always been thinking about her. She kept drifting back across my, be it across my, computer screen when I was searching for something. I was like, oh my goodness, I knew her.
Yeah.
And then, things came together because Wild Women in the Blues originally started as a romance. And
yeah, which, there's obviously a strong romantic element to it, but that's really not like the full thrust of it's really
it's definitely
personal like discoveries and things, but there's obviously a beautiful romantic element to it as well. So it started as a romance. Did you have Honoré from the beginning?
Yes. Honoré was, I'll say that the first few pages of Honoré's chapter, introductory chapter, have not changed that much in 6 years.
That's cool.
She sort of came to me. Her story went through some changes, let's say that. But she came to me pretty quickly. Sawyer came Honoré came to me pretty quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's part of the discovery process. I think that I'm very excited about with any story that I write. And the one I'm working on now, for example, is having a lot of discovery going.
Which we will talk about too. We obviously want to hear about your new project. So typically, did you say I want to go 1920s, and then did you pick the era first, and then kind of say who is living in this era, and what story can I extrapolate from that?
I'm a music fan, and I'm a person who has spent time listening to music in New Orleans and worked at a lot of blues joints in Chicago.
Cool.
Chicago is a huge music town.
Yes, it is. It's amazing.
Rich history in that area. You live in Chicago, and I lived in Chicago for a while. You are immersed in its history right away because of Capone, because of the fires, because of the rich African American history in the city. During the
focuses on
years, all of that. So I just thought I just enjoy the 1920s. I can't say I picked it as much as it might have just organically picked me.
Yeah. It's just an era I'm the same way. I'm very there's certain eras of history that are standouts to me, and the 1920s is one of them. And it's because it's such an interesting time, and it's such a departure, I think, from the kind of the rest of American history. We almost had this great it was sort of this big rebirth of the country and the spirit of the country. And then we went right back to the Great Depression, and it kind of closed down. But it was this amazingly liberated and, not without its problems. And we will talk about all of that. But there's just something about it with this idea of everyone kind of behaving badly with prohibition, and how crime was just a part of life for everyone, because it was this is an insane law and we have to get around it. And it's this very unusual time. So
it has a lot to offer. I must admit that I enjoy, there's something about early 20th century history period that I find fascinating, especially because of the stories about the African American community that aren't as readily being told. It's happening more and more, however, which is very, very exciting. But to be able to share those perspectives, or to share stories that offer audiences, readers, a different perspective, is very much something that I'm excited to be able to deliver through my books. So,
absolutely.
So 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. I'm a huge fan of the 50s and the 60s. So, you know, and as you get older, and they say 50 years ago is historical fiction,
Yep.
50 years ago keeps
It keeps moving up. I know now it's like 2000, early 2000s are like historical fiction, which is like makes me want to cry a little bit, but
that'll be too intense.
But I do, you know, I was going to talk about this a little later in the interview, but since you brought it up, let's just talk about it right now. The exceptional achievements of the African American community during this time, artistically, creatively, economically. It was a period of incredible growth and incredible contribution that is often, I think, understated, and it cannot be said enough how our biggest cultural icons, like, of the time, like, so many of them were Black, and we need to talk about that, because obviously, you know, this is a very important thing, and thank God we're getting more and more books that highlight and celebrate these great achievements from authors like yourself, who are doing this very important work.
And I would also say that the 1920s don't, in my research, I'm not a historian, but the 1920s showcase just another aspect of what was happening, what happened in the African American community in America. Every decade that you can imagine has great stories that can be told, and great achievements that can be celebrated through fiction or nonfiction, or however you want to approach it. One of the joys that I've experienced in doing my research is how much more was happening during that time period. I don't necessarily write about people, or at least in this particular stretch of storytelling that I'm doing, I'm not writing about people who are going out to conquer the world. They are seeking to control the environment in which they live. And that, I felt, was so strongly a part of the African American history in Chicago, in the Black Belt, in Bronxville, during the 1920s, because this community had layers of income, of accomplishment, of yes, there was crime. Yes, there were some awful living conditions. There were the restrictions imposed by the white community on the Black community in terms of where people could live, the jobs they could have. But at the same time, within that community, people were living their lives, and their lives were joyful as well as challenged. So there's so much to be told that I'm just very excited about the reception that the book is receiving, about the books that are coming. I can go on. There are a few that are coming real soon that I'm very excited about. Two pop into my head right now. Piper Hughley's By Design is coming in. It's about Miss Lowe, and I don't have the whole title in front of me, but that's coming in 2022, early, I think February.
Fabulous.
And then one that's coming in August, Sisters in Arms by Kaya Alderson, is telling the story of World War II unit of African women. And
cool.
You know, so, and that's just some of it. I mean, tip of the iceberg. And it's coming, and it's very exciting and thrilling.
Well, I mean, I feel like I learned so much. I mean, you have from your book about this particular community, the Bronzeville community, the Black Belt in Chicago. You know, you say in your author's note, like, the Harlem Renaissance is, of course, a bit more known on a general, you know, knowledge kind of level, but this was such an important movement in and of itself, and I really do feel like I get a really good sense of the community. Can you talk about your research? It's so well researched. I mean, the details are so fabulous. Can you talk about your research project, and maybe one or two kind of favorite things that you learned in this journey? Like, I know you could probably talk about a million. I can see your love of history, and as a lover of history myself, I'm so appreciative, because this is how I like to learn. I really prefer to learn through fiction. I also read nonfiction, but I love to learn from a story. I love to learn in that context. So thank you for presenting the research so well. And so tell me about your research process and some of the fun
research
things.
is, I've had some really good folks in to mirror, if you will, or to um, take as mentors, whether they knew it or not, from their books. Everybody from Beverly Jenkins and her fabulous career as a historical romance writer, and the stories and the history that she shares in her process, to Vanessa Riley, who also writes historical romance and historical fiction. I mean, Piper Hughley, again, a name I've mentioned already, but my process for research starts with, how do people make money? And
oh, I love that question. What a great question.
I have to give credit where credit is due. That question was something that I learned from L.A. Banks, the late L.A. Banks, who was a African-American paranormal fiction writer, mostly for St. Martin's Press. But she said in her world building of her fantasies or of her paranormal novels, the first thing she wanted to know was, how do people make money?
Yeah.
And that gave her the foundation for a lot of information and what to search for. So I went in and studied the financial situation of the people who lived in the Black Belt during that time period. And that's where I learned about policy gambling. And then I went to Chicago, of course, spent time in Chicago because by then I'd moved out of the city. And I returned and visited the Harold Washington Library, where I spent a week with an archivist and a librarian and the map room. And so that's a fabulous resource. Please utilize your libraries and your librarians. The Library of Congress.
They know things.
They know things, and they can help you find those collections. I ended up working with the Vivian G. Harsh collection, which she was the first African American hired by the Chicago Public Library system. I think in early 1920s. I can't remember the exact date, but one of the things she did was to gather and collect documents, books. She had an ongoing program where she brought in writers like Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, just lots of stuff. So that research, that process, starting with the economy and then the music. I mean, the jazz scene. There's
nothing like it.
Nothing like it. And Ken, what's his name? Last name? Ken something. The documentary producer.
Ken Burns.
Yes, Ken Burns. He has a fabulous documentary on the history of jazz, and that also helped inspire my zoning in on that time period, and helped and was a good resource for research as well. Plus, I had a stack of books.
Yes, you actually list your books in the back of the book, which I would encourage everyone. I always love to read the author's notes and the acknowledgments and stuff. And when you read the book, do go back there and read a little more about Denny and her process, because she has some great recommended reading to learn more about the subjects that she explores in her book. Let's get back to the story itself, and let's talk about, so we have these two dual timelines. The book has dual timelines, 1925 and 2015. Can you talk a little bit structurally about, you could have easily just written this book in, I always say this with historical fiction, like the historical fiction could just happen on its own. It could have been a book set in the 1920s and that's it. Or it could have been a book set in 2015 with some allusion. Like, what about dual timelines appeals to you? And how did you go about structuring these two complicated, overlapping timelines? Are you a note taker? Are you an outliner? Do you have note cards? Are you just a fly by the seat of your pants kind of gal? How did you go about it from a structural standpoint?
I think I could try to say that I'm a plotter, but then I mentioned the fact that it took me 6 years to write the book. So there's a little bit of a contradiction there.
Yeah.
Just a tad.
Not at all. Are you like me where you start an outline and you're like, I'm going to write a really good outline. And then you're like halfway through it. You're like, I'm sick of writing this. I'm going to go back to writing the book.
Actually, I finished the outline.
You did the outline. Oh, good for you. You're better than I am.
But then I start writing and something else happens. And, or then I'm not as, I think as I write more books, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I become more decisive about where I want a story to go. The outline gives me a strong framework, and I know what I want to put on the page. It's just that when you're building those scenes and structuring your story, you're also, at least for me, thinking of your reader experience. And if you look at a scene or a chapter or progression of your story, I want that experience to be something that is a page-turning, memorable experience for the reader. And you can write. I can write for days about absolutely nothing.
We all can. Are you an overwriter then? Because I am an overwriter. Yes. Like I'll write like 4 books to get to like 1 chapter. Like not quite, but like like I'm an overwriter. Are you an overwriter? So what's your editing process? How do you pair yourself?
It's hard because what I am trying to do is, frankly, learn more from some of my more seasoned writer friends about this, write the entire book and not care that it sucks. Okay, just get it done. And then come back in and layer in all of those things that need to be there in order to have that compelling read. Well, the challenge is that when you are an overwriter, I think, is that you sometimes will spend more time on the first act than anything. And then all the deadlines are looming. And the rest of the book has to be cleaned up too.
Right.
So what I do is I write out of order now.
Oh, interesting.
And I edit out of order. Because thank God for Scribner, that allows me to also take that extra text, because sometimes it's just a matter of not wanting to let go. You spend all these hours writing.
It's hard to kill your darlings.
So what I do is put them in a folder on my Scribner in my little what I'm working on now book. And and I will start sharing what I call some of the scenes that didn't make it, the other book that didn't make it, but, with my newsletter, into my newsletter.
I love that. Everyone sign up for Jenny's newsletter so you can read her beautiful writing that didn't make it into the final cut. I love that idea. Like
it helps. It helps with the torture of what do they call it? Killing your darlings. It's just like, let them go. I'll use them later.
Oh, I love that. So when you say you edit out of order, do you start at the end, or do you start like somewhere in the middle, or do you just randomly pick a thing and you're like, I'm going to do this one today?
Since I have, I want to have a pathway to the big scenes. So once what I'm doing in this revision is definitely writing the big scenes, and then some of them aren't clean because I got feedback from my editor, so I know what I'm striving to accomplish. So I just really looked at my big scenes because we made some changes to the story arc, and that way I'm giving myself some goalposts that I can reach for, and hopefully that will help me move some of that extra scenes or the things that need to be cut. I can see them more readily because I know where I know what's happening in the big scenes.
Yep.
And sometimes I just have a scene that comes to me and I have to write it. I have to write it. And or I know that the scene that's in the book that's already there could use this change, and I have to go there and make it.
Yeah.
So writing out of order for some people, I mean, the first draft, second draft, the revising, I should be specific. In my revision process, I will revise out of order. You know,
it's so interesting. I always admire people who can think non-sequentially like that and like hold the whole narrative, you know, in your head at the same time. Because I think it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to like, and so many writers, like, we focus on that like first chapter, and it's like you feel like you can't move on until you get that first chapter, but you have to. You cannot spend your whole life revising one first chapter. You have to move on. You have to get the rest of the story, because people are going to read the rest of the story.
Exactly. They're not going to spend 6 months looking at the first chapter.
Right. They're going to get in and out. They want to get to the rest. They want to get to the good stuff.
And also, once you're under contract, you don't have 6 years.
Right.
And nor would you want to.
Yeah.
Right? So this book is due, and well, I mean, this book is more than due. I mean, I'm revising because we have a date for my next book. It's called Blackbirds.
Yes, I was going to say, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. And it's coming out in April of 2022. At least that's what last thing I heard. It's another dual timeline. The story takes place in 1928 Los Angeles and 1968 during a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles. It's sort of like the central thing is a hotel that I had the opportunity to visit when I was last in LA, and it's probably been 3 years since we lost a travel year. So thank goodness I'd done a lot. I sort of research ahead. You know, probably 6 years to write the first, because I was always thinking about some other things. But so I have like 3 books I've researched.
Of course. Do you have a book folder? Do you have like a book ideas like document? I do. I have to have that, because if not, I'll get too distracted and I'll go on to something else. That's
I have. I definitely have to do that, because the other thing that I do is that I have been known to take a class, an online class, where the purpose of the class is to really give you a kickstart on your idea, so that you can, you know, really work out your turning points and your characters and stuff like that. And, you know, you spend 6 weeks and it's over there someplace. And what you end up having is exactly what you mentioned, a folder where you have not only your story ideas, but definitely some of the things that are going to go in your story. And research, you fold that into your ION timeline. That's it's spelled AEON. And then you can have it as a reference. So fingers crossed, the system will continuously improve for me, and so that I can churn out my process. I can smooth out my process a little bit more.
I love it. Going back to Wild Women. So then, and specifically Honoré, because Honoré is like one of those characters that you just, at least that I just fall in love with. Like, I am a sucker for a woman like Honoré. Give me a character who's like a showgirl, who makes some questionable decisions and is tough as nails, but is super ambitious and talented and like has tons of moxie, and like that's like gumption. Like, that is like Honoré, and like everything from her name, Honoré Dalcour. Like, come on. Like, I
die out of that name too. That was the research about. I researched her name because I wanted to make certain that she's originally from, her family's originally from New Orleans, Creole background. I wanted, there's African American or African descendants
Yep.
in the Dow Corps. Honor Ray was a woman's name in that time. So and I changed the pronunciation a little bit, or the spelling, because it's in part with the French, of course. But so I really did do, that was like, me and names. I love names, and the same thing with Ezekiel. And
the characters are perfectly named, and they're perfectly, you know, everybody's sort of perfectly suited. It really does feel like you just look at at some books, and it's like all the pieces are right there, and like sometimes you look at a book and everybody's like, you're like, why is that person here? And like everybody in your book, I feel like everybody is there. Is this cast the cast you originally had, or broadly, like, how different is this book from the idea that you had, and how did it evolve over time?
That's a good question, because what jumps in my mind is some of those scenes I took out of the book, and I will credit one scene in particular to my author friend Leslie Penelope, who is a fabulous fantasy writer. But they're definitely characters and scenes that just are gone. I have to, this is the other thing about writing books. After you finish, you sometimes forget who's in the book.
Yep. You're like,
I'm trying to think. You asked me the question, and my brain is going, okay, because I'm also immersed in this revision. So I'm like, no, that's not the right one.
You're like, is this the right book? What's happening?
So you have a little crazy moment. So there are a couple of characters that are gone. That the more I think about it, there've been a lot of, especially in the Sawyer storyline. There were some things that really switched around, because I wanted to bring him, because he's really a frame story. But I wanted to bring some more of, make him a little bit less, frankly, I wanted him less whiny.
Isn't it hard? Like, do you find, full disclosure, I'm writing a dual timeline book myself. And I, for some reason, it's half in the 1950s, like it's 1950s and contemporary. The 1950s thing just like flew out of me. It was like the easiest thing. And I was like, this could be its own book. Like, it's just like, everything is so clear. And like, I get to the contemporary world and I'm like, this is boring. This is a mess. This doesn't need to happen. Like, what is it about the frame story that, like, do you think it's a particular challenge? Did you, knowing, how do you use the frame story, or how did you use the frame story in this case to kind of
mystery? I used it to add mystery. And also to juxtaposition personalities from one time period to the next. And so it's multi-generational, and I wanted to have an older character. And I do something, I must admit, Blackbirds has some of that same family saga and generational thing going on. One of my professors, I was a Tin House, which is a degree program that I was accepted into. And my instructor during Tin House was a gentleman by the name of Matt Johnson, who is a fabulous writer. But he said to me, make sure you research your 2015 storyline as intensely as you do your 1925 storyline. And that bit of information totally helped me to better understand that when you're doing two timelines that have a time split, you can do different POVs within the same timeline. And that's going to be happening in my third book, that also lend themselves to mystery. But in this dual timeline, because I don't know if you read Beatrice Williams.
I love Beatrice Williams. Oh yeah. She nails it, those dual timelines.
She definitely does. And
She's going to actually be on the show, I think, on June 25th. She's going to be.
I'm watching.
Yeah, she's going to be chatting with me about her. She's like, I'm like Beatrice Williams. I'm like a stan. Like, I'm like so creepy. I like follow her around to bookstores, and I'm like, "Hi, I love your new book. Like, nice to see you."
Right. Yeah, I do enjoy her books tremendously. Kate Quinn is another. Chanel Cleaton is another. I definitely in that dual timeline, especially that storytelling structure. Those three come are top of mind, and so yeah, I different people. I remember a couple of years ago at a historical novel event, I was not able to attend the panel that I think it was Beatrice and Kate did, but I sent a friend to take notes.
Your proxy.
Yeah, proxy. And but different authors approach dual timelines differently. Some authors will write one story.
Yep.
And they'll write the other story, and then they'll put them together. I, in my first draft, must go back and forth.
Yep.
One feeds off the other. Then I find I separate during revisions. I have to stick with one storyline and let that, clean that up, get it where it needs to be, and then tackle revisions for the other time period.
I love this. Oh, I could talk process all day, but I want to talk a little more about you, because I think you are a fascinating woman too. You're a real, true Renaissance woman, which is a woman after my own heart. You have been a professional dancer, singer, actor, marketing professional, PR guru. You're a history buff, like everything, like, and you say again in your author's note, like, you're so interested by art, music, history, culture, everything, which is like, that's like, I love when I hear authors talk about that, because like that's how I feel too. Like, these are all the things, like, I'm like, I am a sucker for anything that has to do with the humanities, and like, I don't know how to do math, but like I give it to me all. I want all of the creative things that anyone, and I've never met like a creative or artistic discipline that I wasn't interested in.
Absolutely. And I feel the same way about all of those art forms. And I credit my work in public relations and marketing for exposing me even more so to especially the art world.
Yeah.
I going back when I was dancing, of course, I started as a ballet dancer, so I had a lot of exposure to classical music. That's just the process of learning the Balanchine technique or ABT or whoever I was supposed to be doing. And
are you tall? Are you in it? Are you? See, I'm not tall, so I was like denied from SAB right away. Like, they were like, nope, too short.
Too tall. During my
go to Paris Opera.
I was actually too tall, because once you get on the point shoes, it was a mess. But and that was okay with me, because the people who were trying to lift me, I was like, I don't trust you. I don't know you. Anyway, so I ended up dancing modern dance primarily, but still lots of exposure to music just as part of the class process. So I loved, I just have a very wide interest in when it comes to music. I will zone in on jazz during, a lot, and R&B. Now, from that experience, once I started working in PR and marketing, I was a media manager, if you will, for a major corporation in the Chicago area. And one of my jobs was working with the Art Institute of Chicago. So I got to be the promotions, publicity connection, and had exposure to curators and the development of shows and of art shows. So my appreciation of art it just got into the mix as part of my work life. And then I worked at zoos. I was the director of marketing at a zoo. I don't
So
know.
how did all of that experience feed into your desire to be a writer and kind of help you as a writer? Because I don't think that they're separate. I think that there's a connection. How for you did that manifest into writing, and specifically into writing this book?
Well, communication is a part of what I was and am as a marketing professional. I had to be able to communicate product,
Yep.
communicate events, and why they were important to end users, et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. So as I wrote a lot,
Yep.
and it wasn't fun copy, but I also like to tell stories,
Yep.
And then I stumbled upon fan fiction.
Yes.
And fan fiction became a place where I could really hang out and enjoy that other side of my writing life. Because, it was online
Yep.
and your identity was not important. It was just that you fell into whatever fandom attracted you. And I happened to fall into Buffy the Vampire Slayer
Which,
and
yay, Buffy. Love Buffy.
and
Love
Angel.
Buffy.
Angel was more
Angel. Yeah, I know.
Buffy, because Buffy would get on my nerves after a it's just like,
Was there anyone hotter than Angel?
Angel was pretty
Like
good.
of a certain
Spike
era, right? Like,
Spike had his moments.
yeah.
Spike had
Spike did have his moments. Spike
yeah,
did have his
I
moments.
wrote, Buffy, Spike, fanfic,
But
but I also just wrote I liked Angel and Cordelia of
yeah.
people, but, I did. And anyway, so I wrote that, I wrote Leverage fan fiction, and this was my way of and Being Human, the British version, excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
But this was my way of relaxing. I'd come
Cool.
in from whatever crazy travel and or work day,
Mhm.
and I kick back and get online, visit the forums, and start writing, do prompts or whatever was going on. This all happened a lot on LiveJournal
Yeah.
back in the day. And so that was a very important
Yeah.
place for me
Mhm.
that eventually definitely led me to writing original fiction because one of the writers, Alicia Raisley, was a fan fiction writer, but also a member of, at the time, RWA, Romance Writers of
Yeah.
America. And she suggested to me that I join her at a conference. So I said, sure, why not?
Cool.
So I'd go hang out at conferences. They became my vacation for about 8 years. I just go. I wasn't planning to write
Mhm.
anything because I was busy doing my career thing. And but they grew on me. And I started saying, oh, I want to write this. I want to write
Yeah.
that. So that's how it evolved.
That's how I love that. I mean, the practice, like when you think about the 10,000 hours, of that's required for mastery,
Yeah.
people don't really think of practicing writing, but like that's practice. That's the
Oh,
same as me sitting
absolutely.
down. I was a songwriter I still am.
Mhm.
But I've written probably thousands of songs over the time and like you just write and you write and you write. And it's true. In the same way for me, novel writing started as a hobby from my day job of writing songs. And I was like, I need to write something that's not music. Like I need my brain to work in a different way so I can shut my brain off. But like you
Yeah,
see
yeah.
how it's related to your work, but then it becomes and evolves in something else. So what was there a moment that you were like, okay, like I'm gonna write and this is the book? Or did you have
I
other
have
books that
I
you
have 5 books that I've written
there
before
you go.
Women in
I
Blue.
love to tell people that because folks, it's not necessarily the first
Yeah,
one.
yeah, it's definitely not the first one that
Yeah.
hits the printed page, if you will.
Yep.
Yeah, I think my first book that I was writing romantic suspense,
Mm.
and actually won the now retired Golden Heart
Yes. Exactly.
from RWA for a romantic suspense. that I entered into their unpublished contest, the Golden
Cool.
Then after that, I have at least 2 vampire stories and a
In the era, I assume, of Twilight. Like, was this the era,
oh,
or was it or was it pre-Twilight?
my vampire stories are not Twilight.
Yeah. No, I just mean in the era of, like, it seemed like
No,
vampires
it was
they were.
actually still left over from Buffy.
Wow.
It was leftover Buffy
I love it.
energy, because I was really immersed in the fandom. I think
Yeah.
that I even won awards in the fandom and had a website that was hugely popular and all of this sort of stuff. So I pulled everything down, and then I started looking at some of those stories and said, there's something here. So I ended up writing a couple of vampire stories and a couple of other books. I wrote an erotic novella
Perfect.
that will never see the light of day. And stuff like that. So you just keep writing. That, to your point, you keep writing. I mean, you hear authors say this, and you may or may not believe it as a aspiring author, published author. It's true. You keep writing, and eventually it's sort of like dance class and going to the bar every day, and not the drinking bar. I mean, the dance bar,
the ballet bar,
ballet bar, and doing your rond de jambes and your port de bras and your everything, and your muscles start to remember what's going on and what should be happening with your body during that time. And those are the muscles. That's why people say write all the time, because you're developing and getting that muscle memory going. I just wish my muscle memory in writing would be a little bit faster, but
I do too. I mean, like, the learning curve is steep, right? And, like, there's something like it's a but that's why it's fun, right? Because it's a challenge. Like, if it were easy, it wouldn't be as much fun. Especially, like, I think as a dancer, I mean, you want to like land that, like, you want the quad, you don't want to just do the triple pirouette. You want the quad, and then you want to do, and then you want it to be more, and then you want to do the double fouettes, and then you want to do, like, you really want it to keep getting more and more complex. And I'm so thrilled about your contracts, so that we can look forward to more fabulous books from you. Before we go, real quick, do you want to just give a shout out to an independent bookstore where people can maybe pick up the book, order from?
I think it's the Bookworm. It's in the Bookworm Bookshop in my new home state of Georgia. Fabulous group of the staff is fabulous. We did an virtual event there. Love them. Can't wait until we're up and about so I can visit with them. They are definitely for today, because there are many bookstores around the country that I love. But I really wanted to give a shout out to them.
That's fabulous. And you actually have your first live in-person event as a published author coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about that, if anyone's in the area?
I'm so excited about this. It is happening June 12th and 13th in Winston-Salem. It's called Movable Feast, brought by Bookmarks. And I am just so excited. In addition, I get to see some friends I haven't seen in a while. Friends who are going to be a part of the authors who will be participating in the program. So Julie Dalton will be there, and Sadiq Wood Johnson will be there. So, and more people that I know. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
I love it. You are just a delight, Denny. Like, this book is so wonderful. I can't rave about it enough. It's so good. It's so just like immersive. It just sucks you into the 1920s. It sucks you into this story. It's high stakes. It's like emotional. It's complex. It's everything you want out of a very juicy and satisfying read to just transport you to another era. Before we go, if you could go back to 1920s Chicago and spend a day, what would that day look like?
A day in 1920s.
Or a night, if the day isn't that interesting.
Probably would be an evening,
Yep.
a late evening. I would want to see Lil Hardin on stage.
Yeah.
Lil Hardin Armstrong performing with Louis Armstrong and the band she created, because it was all about her. And just watching her in action live.
The Queen of the Stroll, right?
Queen of the Stroll, I would love that. And then I'd hang out with, between Honore, Ezekiel, and Trudy.
Yes.
I might go to the
Trudy. Loved Trudy.
I know.
I love Trudy.
I love Trudy too.
Like, I love Trudy. Like, I kind of feel like Trudy's like the to me, Trudy's like kind of the unsung hero of the book in a way. I love that. And you have so many, I had questions about, you have so many complex women. Like I just want to give a shout out that all of your characters are wonderful, but like this book is just populated with strong women, strong Black women. Like it's so wonderful. I love all of them. I fell in love with all of them. I could talk to you for like another hour. Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye. But I want to say thank you so much again, Denny, for joining us. Wild Women in the Blues, folks, pick it up. Yes, thank you so much for being here. And make sure you follow Denny on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and sign up for her newsletter to get her cutting room floor excerpts. Keep an eye out for Blackbirds, which is coming in hopefully April 2022. Any last words, Denny, to the crew, to the audience?
Thank you so much to you and to A Mighty Blaze for having me here live. And I hope more people grab hold of Wild Women in the Blues, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you to Margaret Pinard, who's being our producer today and running everything behind the scenes, and Hannah, who is helping her out there. Thank you to all of you Blazers and Lit Chicks. We will be back next week with Kevin Kwan to talk about the paperback release of his new book, Sex and Vanity. Sex and Vanity? Yes, that's what it's called. I'm like, I have so many books in my head now. Right? I read 4 books at the same time. And I'm like, wait, who am I talking to this week? Denny, thank you so much once again. Wild Women in the Blues, pick it up and you will not be disappointed. Thank you all. Have a great week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.